Long considered a buffoon, a bumbling brute, an insignificant tyrant, very much overshadowed by Adolf Hitler, the man who dragged Italy into World War II is one of history's most famous dictators. One of the most derided as well, Mussolini. On April 29, 1945, the day before Hitler's suicide, his body was displayed in public in a Milan square. He, his mistress, and other leading fascists had been executed by Italian partisans. His corpse was mutilated and strung up by its feet for all to see. And yet, several months earlier, in this very spot, Mussolini had been worshipped as a living god. They called him Il Duce, the leader. 100 years ago, in 1922, he seized power in Italy through violence and deception and invented fascism. For more than 20 years, he imposed totalitarianism on his people, a strategy admired by dictators around the world.
He was a genius. I still make the Roman salute.
Definitely.
It wasn't like this, but like this, the Roman salute.
Those years were years of pain and suffering.
I'm always struck by how these charismatic figures manage to bewitch so many people.
This is the story of a power-hungry megalomaniac who wanted to change the soul of Italy and led his people to disaster. This tragic story begins in the 1920s in beautiful Italy, the land of Michelangelo, Dante, and Verdi. A glorious past, a nation in crisis. The average income was 3 times lower than in France and Great Britain. To escape poverty, millions of Italians chose to emigrate. Score settling, assassinations, riots. Since Italy's victory alongside France and Great Britain in 1918, civil war had undermined democracy. Farmers everywhere grabbed uncultivated land. Workers started strikes and lashed out at their bosses. During the Great War, they had been promised social reforms, which never materialized. In Italy, trade unions and leftist parties united against the bourgeoisie. Facing them, this dapper man, Benito Mussolini, the strikers' arch enemy, the man who wanted to transform Italy. The teacher turned journalist had recently created a movement, Fascism. In this Milanese palazzo lent to him by local industrialists. Fascism for Fascis, a symbol of power in ancient Rome. He adopted the Roman salute and made his men wear a uniform, the black shirt, sometimes with a skull on their helmets. Their weapons, These clubs, or manganello, that were used to terrorize the left. Their motto, me ne frego, I don't give a damn. Mussolini had 300,000 men and the streets were theirs. Replacing the strikers, they drove the trams and kept the streets clean. Most were war veterans, advocates of extreme violence. They dreamt of revolution, a revolution of the right, to put the country in order and make Italy a world power. All over the country, they terrorized the Reds during brutal, punitive expeditions. I ask for one ferocious man with the energy to break and attack without hesitating, declared Mussolini. He was convinced he could achieve power by crushing the Marxists. His ambition was to rule Italy, alone, no matter what the cost.
He was hugely ambitious. He was capable of crushing absolutely anyone.
He was an aggressive man. The aim of fascism is that violence solves everything. That was the idea.
Teresa Vergali. Her family was persecuted by the first fascists.
My father told me they lured him out of the cooperative's bar by saying to him, "We need a word." There were three of them. Two men held him down and the third beat him up. They left him lying there.
Mussolini used castor oil as an instrument of torture, forcing it down his enemies' throats.
After swallowing castor oil, the poor victim couldn't control his bowels. He would soil himself and have to walk across the village square. And everyone would stare. Not everyone could stand it, in fact.
The left Mussolini persecuted were no strangers to him. Before the Great War, he had been one of them. He was born in this valley, in the village of Predappio, in Romagna, a socialist stronghold 2 hours from Venice. He described his childhood as tough, with his pious schoolteacher mother and his anarchist blacksmith father, considered dangerous by the police. Like his father, Benito Mussolini spent several spells in prison for revolutionary agitation, including in 1911 when Italy invaded Libya and committed atrocities against its people. An anti-colonialist, Mussolini led a riot to block the movement of troops to Libya. His enemies at the time were those of his father, the army, the bourgeoisie, and the church, all those who would later support him. A strange character. He read a lot and played the violin alone in the countryside for hours on end, an odd mixture of strength and sensitivity. But he was unable to control his violence. As a teenager, he raped one of his neighbors and later wrote about it in a book. Then he married a local girl, Rachele Guidi. He proposed to her gun in hand and threatened to kill her, her parents, and himself if he was turned down. Dramatic and impulsive, he was wounded at the front in 1917. And the hell of the trenches was a life-changing experience. For him, Italy's sacrifices had not been sufficiently rewarded by the Allies. 600,000 dead, 1 million wounded, and a mutilated victory, according to the expression of the time. Now a nationalist, He was an advocate of violence. The fascists saw war as the great test of nations. This is his desk. He ran the newspaper Il Popolo d'Italia, which he founded in Milan with the help of a group of industrialists. 3 years after the Russian Revolution of 1917, Italy's business community now saw him as a bulwark against communism. In return, Mussolini lent them his men to break strikes and protect their property. Marta Badoni's father was an industrialist and member of the Italian Fascist Party.
This is my father with his funny hat. We lived through violence, that's for sure. He was kicked out of his factory by the workers. We were extremely frightened of the Russians. That was Italy. We were afraid the Russians would eat our children.
I think my father saw Mussolini as the man capable of restoring order in the chaos that was Italy.
In 1922, Italy was ready to embrace fascism. And the parliamentary monarchy did not stand in the way. In Rome, King Victor Emmanuel III, nicknamed Pipetto by the Italians due to his small stature, feared for his crown. He was responsible for appointing the prime minister and was willing to negotiate to save his position. Opposite him, a political class alarmed by the fascists, but incapable of presenting a united front. This man was the then Prime Minister, Luigi Facta, a moderate reformer. After months of inaction, he wanted to oppose Mussolini. But it was a vain wish. Because in October 1922, in one of those tragic moments when history speeds up, Italy changed dramatically. The March on Rome, a lesson in how to stage a coup for budding dictators and, in particular, Hitler, who watched attentively from Germany. In Naples, the great city of the South, 40,000 fascist militants attended the party's national convention. Elected as a deputy, along with 30 or so black shirts 18 months earlier, Mussolini decided to hasten history and launch an attack on Rome to take control of the country. For months, his supporters had urged him to go for broke. At a mass rally in Naples, Mussolini launched an ultimatum from the podium. Either the government will be given to us, or we will march on Rome. It was a risky gamble. If the government sent in the army and decided to open fire, it would be the end for him and prison. That very evening, playing the respectable politician, he left his raging supporters in Naples and returned to Milan. Then waited. The insurrection was planned for October 27th. Some made a head start. Without waiting for the 27th, cities rose up. Pisa, Cremona. While in Milan, carrying on as if it was business as usual, Mussolini went to his newspaper offices and attended the opera with his wife. In fact, he had already given the order to march on the capital. The situation could have turned violent at any moment. Surprisingly, on reaching Rome, the fascists encountered no resistance. After 3 years of civil war, The state was in disarray. Everything depended on the king. Prime Minister Facta had asked him to declare a state of siege and send in the army. But fearing he would be swept from power and to avoid chaos, Victor Emmanuel refused to use force. 5 days after the ultimatum, he offered ministerial posts to Mussolini and 3 of his deputies. In Milan, Mussolini turned his nose up at what he considered a miserable plate of lentils. For him, it was either complete power or chaos. Italy was on the brink of explosion. Business leaders voiced their official support for Mussolini. And the king yielded. He asked Mussolini to form a new government. Here is Mussolini arriving in Rome. He had waited years for this moment. Having marched from Naples, the militants turned out to welcome him. With Mussolini, their life would soon change for good. In a top hat, the young thug from Predappio, the street brawler, far more subtle than he appeared, was received by the king and appointed as prime minister. "If father could see me," Mussolini whispered to his brother. His legal coup d'etat was a stroke of political genius.
A miracle. A dream that could become reality. And did become reality. We immediately saw that things were changing and order was being restored in Italy.
With its whippings, beatings, screaming, and assassinations, the new fascist order was underway. And beautiful Italy would not resist for long. In the heart of Rome, at the Chigi Palace, Mussolini could now impose totalitarian rule over Italy and realize his dream of turning the country into a fascist society. But to achieve this, he needed complete power, which was not the case. The king and parliament still had power. The press was free to say what it liked, and the trade unions to strike. He was only halfway there. As head of government, Mussolini personally took over the ministries of the Interior and Foreign Affairs. Taking over the rest would require stealth. Just this once, he went on a charm offensive. He instantly won over 2 of his main opponents, former prime ministers. He was seen everywhere, smiling, embracing these conservatives he despised, but whose support he needed to dominate parliament. His argument? The fear of communist chaos. And it worked. The moderates in parliament granted him full powers for 1 year. Time enough to quash the left, they thought. Mussolini used his power to suppress civil liberties. He'll calm down, they said. In 1923, he had a new electoral law passed and won the general election the following year. Mussolini had become respectable. But he reverted to type, taking more of a stick than a carrot approach. Now the regime's official militia, his gang of thugs led an assault on the strongholds of the left and publicly humiliated politicians, such as this deputy, during the conquest of power. Trade unionists were hunted down. Some were dragged, their feet tied, behind trucks. The Black Terror reached its height during the elections. In 1924, several of his cronies kidnapped the leader of the opposition, socialist deputy Giacomo Matteotti, and stabbed him to death in a car. His corpse was found 2 months later in the countryside. A huge scandal. Italy was in shock. Mussolini almost lost everything. But he was much wilier than people supposed. He survived several assassination attempts, a fact he exploited to the fullest. The bullet nicked his nose. See how he used this? Italy is more threatened than ever, he declared. Under the pretext of defending the state, he pushed the leggi fascistissime, or fascist legislation, through Parliament. Drafted earlier and pulled out of the drawer at the right moment, they abolished all civil liberties. All trade unions were banned except the official fascist trade union. No more newspapers except for those friendly to Mussolini. A single party, his. A parliament that passed any law it was asked to and served no purpose. As for the king, he was reduced to a mere symbol. By the mid-1920s, democracy was dead in Italy. Long live Il Duce.
Tanto maggiori sono gli ostacoli e tanto più precisa e dritta deve essere la nostra volontà di superarli.
To sweeten the pill, Mussolini used an old recipe: national pride. To put an end to the old Italian hang-ups and propose a dream.
Questo secolo sarà il secolo della potenza italiana. Sarà il secolo durante il quale l'Italia tornerà per la terza volta ad essere direttrice della civiltà umana.
To flatter his people, Mussolini reminded them they were the heirs of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance. Emigration abroad is over, he said. No more stereotypical images of Italians. Macaroni, mandolin players, late trains. For 20 years, to make up for lost liberties, Il Duce offered them symbolic compensation.
I think the fact there was someone who said, "Hey guys, we're good, strong, numerous, we're the best," suited us. We who had always felt like we were the class dunces.
Sulle rive del Mediterraneo che sono nate le grandi religioni, le grandi filosofie, la grande poesia e un impero.
Yes, I see myself as a descendant of the Roman Empire because they loved their country as much as I do.
E se domani la rivoluzione chiamerà, voi rispondete come un solo uomo.
For me, he was the Italian soldier because he wanted to expand Italy's territory. You're too young to remember, but we were a very poor country. In some parts, people only ate polenta.
Mussolini, the new Caesar, one of the world's first populists, although the term was yet to be coined. Before his people's astonished eyes, he promised to make Italy great again. He launched a series of battles: the battle for grain, to make Italy self-sufficient in food; the battle of the lira, for national sovereignty. The battle of race would soon follow. To win support, he undertook large-scale public works, such as the reclamation of the Pontine Marshes, a legendary area south of Rome flooded since antiquity and unsuitable for farming. By draining the swamp, distributing land, and building new towns, Mussolini promised an end to emigration and a new Italian Renaissance. Even though previous governments had undertaken similar projects, everyone applauded the new Superman. Mussolini the strategist tackled unresolved issues, such as the dispute with the Vatican that dated back to the unification of Italy when the Pope was dispossessed of his states. Mussolini, the anti-clerical leader, agreed to reintroduce the crucifix in schools, established Catholicism as the state religion, and recognized the sovereignty of the Vatican. The Lateran Accords, a miracle for Catholics, that is, a great many people. Well before anyone else, he understood the power of images. Cameras now followed his every step. In 1924, as he was toppling democracy, Mussolini entrusted the Luce Institute with the task of projecting a positive image of the state, or rather, himself. Movie theaters all over the country screened newsreels about Il Duce, which he signed off. Cinematography is the strongest weapon, he declared. The opportunity as well to promote the social policies of a regime that simply dressed up old things as something new by reorganizing existing systems. In reality, only industrial workers, or almost, benefited from its policies.
I consider him a clever man. Il Duce had no scruples. He knew how to talk to the people. He wasn't an aristocrat.
And to get the party going, he created the Ministry of Popular Culture. The Mussolini Trap.
Per noi fascisti il popolo non è un'astrazione della politica, ma è una realtà viva, concreta.
Italian workers were no longer allowed to strike, but they were granted a 70% discount on train fares for weekends in the country and at the seaside.
Our first friends to go to the coast and see the sea saw it thanks to the summer camps. Fascism took children to the sea and to the mountains. What can I say?
The multitude, like a woman, is made to be violated, declared Mussolini in private.
Io mi preoccupo tutti I giorni, dalla mattina alla sera, lavorando senza contare le ore di lavoro, mi preoccupo di dare il massimo lavoro possibile a tutti gli operai italiani. Così anche per la pace bisogna essere almeno in due.
In the early 1930s, he won over a large part of the population, including some of his future victims. Before Mussolini turned on them, Jews too admired him, such as young Silvana Aiucai in Rome.
I sang it too. It was amusing, actually. What else would you like to know? It seems incredible after 82 years. But I was caught up in the enthusiasm too. We were all happy. I didn't know what he was talking about. Of course he was fascinating. He had a real talent. Like all dictators, he was a great talker. He was talented. That's the way it was.
Che traccia il solco profondo, ma è la spada che lo difende. E il vomere e la lama sono entrambi di acciaio temprato come la fede dei nostri cuori.
When we all woke up, I wondered how I had managed not to laugh when Mussolini made his speeches. He had this fierce look, which was totally ridiculous. But at the time, we all looked at him and thought, what strength!
Mussolini, the mirror in which many Italians saw their own reflection. If Il Duce had succeeded, the whole country could too. He lived in one of Rome's grandest houses, the Villa Torlonia. He hosted the greats of the world there, men such as Gandhi. Churchill praised him to the skies. If I had been Italian, I am sure I would have been with Mussolini from the beginning. In this dream setting, Il Duce continued to play to the cameras. Before any other world leader, he put his family on show. Especially his daughter Ada, his wild filly as he called her. One of the first women in Italy to drive a car and wear short skirts. She later married a count. He and his wife Rachele had 5 children, including Vittorio and Bruno, who became bomber pilots. The stereotypical Latin man. His daughter Ada once said, "My father thinks women should stay at home, have children, and wear horns." He made little attempt to hide his lovers, such as the Venetian socialite Margherita Sarfatti, with whom he spent 15 years. An intellectual, she taught him how to behave in society, introduced him to businessmen and artists, and wrote his biography, Dux, a bestseller in Europe and the United States. She was Jewish. Initially, this was not a problem. Sooner or later, it would become one. Ten years after seizing power, Mussolini became increasingly radical. Fooled by the regime's charm offensive, many failed to realize he was not the sort of tyrant Italy had seen so often in the past, but rather a modern totalitarian dictator who would not stop at exercising power. Il Duce wanted to change his people, to transform them from within. Here is the new man he dreamed of. The jackbooted, strutting, knife-wielding fascist. The new model for the Italians. With these ruthless, fanatic, obedient citizen soldiers, Mussolini thought he would be able to hold on to power for decades.
He said, believe, obey, fight. Believe in what I say and what the party says. Obey without question when I give you orders. And fight, because I'm sending you into battle. He could not have been clearer.
Ora io vi domando, desiderate degli onori, delle ricompense, la vita comoda. Esiste per voi l'impossibile?
There was real respect. I thought, careful, we mustn't criticize Mussolini.
The young Piero Gandini, 10 years old at the time, the budding new man. Like all his generation, he was a member of the Balilla, Mussolini's youth organization. The regime drummed military values and mythology into these young warriors from a very early age.
Ave Caesar.
Hail Caesar. Those who are about to die salute you. What I liked was the military aspect. Having a gun, playing.
I felt I was somebody. It made me feel big and strong.
Il combattimento mai lo dovrete temere. La rivoluzione fascista è circondata da un mondo di nemici. Vi preparerete a combatterli dovunque e senza tregua.
Unlike in the 20s, his enemies were no longer just the socialists and communists, but all those who did not conform, who thought for themselves and refused to kowtow to the dictator. In this totalitarian society, Il Duce was everywhere. He controlled everything.
To get a job in the public sector, you had to be a party member.
When we went to vote, it was like voting in public. We were down below and they were above us, and so they could see what we marked on the slip.
In every village, the party, as well as the local administration, was run by the black shirts. They watched every family.
They would say, the pharmacist in that street is an opponent.
A subversive.
Either we convert him or scare him so much that he stops spreading his propaganda, even if it meant beating him up.
Either you're with us and you do what we tell you to do, or you'll have problems. You'll lose your job. You'll lose your benefits.
Mussolini scared people, that's all. You could be thrown in jail simply for saying, fascism is a disgrace.
To To criticize Il Duce was to attack Italy. Deviant elements were denounced, arrested, and imprisoned. Such as the philosopher Gramsci, one of the founders of the Italian Communist Party, who became the icon of a generation of anti-fascists. To silence the anti-fascists, Mussolini set up the Special Tribunal for the Defense of the State, with the power to impose the death penalty on dissidents or lock them up for years, such as here, off the coast of Naples.
The fascists wanted them to stay there, to keep quiet, so people would forget about them.
If they did something against the regime in power, it's normal they were sent to prison.
Violence is not immoral, said Mussolini. When it is effective in a cancerous situation, it is moral, sacrosanct, and necessary. The fascist police sent 15,000 opponents without trial into confino. This new repressive system was a cross between a concentration camp and house arrest. They were held in huts or village houses, isolated, cut off from their families. They stayed there for years. Some even died in captivity. A less harsh form of repression than in Nazi Germany, but equally effective. To survive, Italians had to play along with the regime, conceal their opinions, and hold tight.
When my father was sent to prison for all those months, how did my mother cope with my newborn brother and 5-year-old me? What sacrifices did she make? The poor woman. She alone knows.
We did what we could, escaping the worst, avoiding evil, hiding, fleeing, hiding other people. I didn't agree. Even though there was this typically Italian habit of being two-faced and pretending to agree with him, applauding, but then going home and laughing about it all.
Violent repression few had imagined, and against which they were now powerless. In Italy, all political opposition fell silent, both left and right. The only Italians to speak out were those who had chosen self-imposed exile, mainly in France, which welcomed 30,000 political refugees for every 1 million Italian immigrants. In Paris, the capital of anti-fascism, they made the public aware of the regime's true nature, and some even met their deaths. Mussolini did not hesitate to have opponents, such as the Rosselli brothers, eliminated by the far-right militants of the Cagoule. The world was outraged, but Il Duce did not give a damn.
Popoli che ci conoscono sotto la specie puramente letteraria, oggi sono sbalorditi dinanzi alla nostra realtà economica, politica e militare.
His regime now inspired other dictators. Men like Mussolini are born only once every 1,000 years, raved Hitler, who had seized power in 1933. Mussolini was now over 50. He ruled from his office at the Palazzo Venezia, surrounded by sycophants. such as the Grand Council of Fascism, whose members he selected among his friends in the party and the government, and who never contradicted him. He still had the support of the business community, the army, and the church. He had it all. But it was not enough. Mussolini was never satisfied. He played with his associates more and more, humiliating them. A man with a voracious sexual appetite, he converted the top floor of the palace for his mistresses. According to his private secretary, he had on average one woman a day. Selected from letters he received from all over Italy, most female admirers had a brief 15-minute encounter with Il Duce. He was obsessed with turning Italy into a nation of fascists. He communicated with the multitude from his balcony. In 1935, he made one of his most important speeches here, the declaration of war against the Empire of Ethiopia. He believed it would be the start of a colonial war that would test the new man and revitalize his regime.
Italiani, parti nel mondo, oltre I monti e oltre gli oceani, ascoltate. O Etiopia, abbiamo pazientato 40 anni, ora basta!
Ethiopia, the war many had been waiting for and Mussolini had dreamt of for years. Before colonizing Libya in 1911, Italy had already tried to take over the Empire of Ethiopia in the 19th century, attacking from Eritrea and Somalia. But it failed miserably. For the former anti-colonialist, Italy too had a right to a place in the sun.
It was his dream to make Italy a colonial power, just as Britain, France, and others were, to a greater extent.
Italy needed space where Italians could work rather than emigrating abroad.
They believed what Mussolini said, that with the wars we would become rich, that we were the heirs of the Romans, that we were superior, with this myth of the superiority of the race.
From the books I read, I thought it was a backward country, because in the past they used witch doctors.
Waged in the name of progress but overtly racist, Mussolini's colonial war was condemned by the international community.
There was this song, "Little black-faced, beautiful Abyssinia, wait and hope. The hour is drawing near when we shall be near you. We will give you our Duce and our king." And we all cried, "Poor thing."
In Ethiopia, the fascist troops used poison gas, a weapon of mass destruction banned by the treaties that Mussolini himself had signed. All the characteristics of a genocide. Il Duce gave free rein to his troops, which included his own children, 19-year-old Vittorio and 17-year-old Bruno. Bomber pilots, presented as prototypes of the new man, they showered incendiary bombs on Ethiopia. It was very enjoyable work, wrote Vittorio in a book on his return.
Quando si è dato tutto alla patria, non si è dato ancora abbastanza. Più coraggio, più tenacia e più grande resistenza.
At the same moment, young Piero Gondini accompanied his parents to Ethiopia. Little did he know that one of their friends, this soldier, a famous mountaineer, would become a criminal.
He received the order from Mussolini to throw poison gas into a cave where thousands of Ethiopians were sheltering with their families. Those who managed to escape were shot on the spot.
Mussolini was at the height of his popularity. To show the world he had the support of his people, he launched a gold campaign, the Day of the Wedding Rings, also known as the Day of Faith. Hundreds of thousands of couples in communion with Il Duce handed over their wedding rings to be melted down. God and history today mean Mussolini, wrote a student leader. Hungry for recognition, sure of his destiny, Mussolini did not intend to stop there.
L'Italia ha finalmente il suo impero. L'Etiopia è italiana.
His delusions of grandeur would soon lead to his downfall.